This
The
house is
rain
not
hadn't
for you
stopped for
anymore.
3 days when
Walk before I call
16-year-old
the police.
Adaeze stood on the front steps with one duffel bag and nowhere left to go. Behind her, her stepmother Ngozi stood in the doorway, arms folded. The porch light cut a hard shadow across her face. This house is not for you anymore. Walk before I call the police. Adaeze didn't cry. She had already cried every tear she owned that year. She looked up once, at the small third-floor window that used to be her mother's room, then stepped into the rain like a girl walking into the mouth of an unknown city. Behind her, the door slammed shut like a verdict. And nobody on that wet street knew the girl disappearing into the dark would one day return with a name the whole country would recognize. Before we go further into what happened to Adaeze that night, and in the years that followed, if this story is already gripping you, if you can already feel your heart tightening, do us a favour. Subscribe to this channel, tap the like button, and in the comments below, tell us which city or state you're watching from tonight. It helps this story reach more hearts like yours, and it lets us know we're not telling this into an empty room. Adaeze was not always unwanted. Before her mother, Amara, died of an illness no specialist in the city could fully explain, she had been the beloved only daughter of a hard-working tailor and his wife, the kind of family that ran a small alterations shop on a busy corner and still made time for Sunday dinners. Her father, Emeka, had built that shop from nothing after immigrating decades earlier, and he doted on Adaeze the way men dote on daughters they fear losing. But grief changes men. Within a year of burying his wife, Emeka remarried, a woman named Ngozi, polished, sharp-tongued, and hungry for a life she felt she'd been owed. Ngozi brought with her 2 children of her own, Chiamaka and Uzo, and from the first week the apartment began to change shape around Adaeze like walls closing in slowly enough that no one else noticed. At first, it was small things. Adaeze's plate served last and smallest. Her school uniform misplaced until it was too late for the first day of term. Then it grew louder. Ngozi began telling the other women in the building that Adaeze was difficult, that bad luck seemed to follow her, that something about the sat right since her mother passed. Emeka, worn down by grief and blinded by a new wife's attention, chose silence over defense. Adaeze learned young that the people meant to protect her would instead watch her struggle and call it her own doing. The turning point came the year Adaeze turned 16. Her father died suddenly. His heart simply stopped one evening while he was closing out the register at the shop. And with him went the last thin thread tying Adaeze to that apartment. 3 weeks after the funeral, Ngozi called her into the living room, dry-eyed, already wearing a pair of gold earrings Adaeze had never seen before. "This is not your father's home anymore," Ngozi said. "It's mine, and I don't owe you a place in it." That was the night of the rain. That was the night the door slammed. Walking through the flooded streets with nowhere to sleep, Adaeze made herself a single promise, whispered like a prayer into the storm. One day they will see me again, and they will regret this night for the rest of their lives. She didn't know yet how that promise would be kept, or what it would cost her to keep it. She only knew she would survive, because survival was the only inheritance left to her. She was taken in, eventually, by an older woman named Miss Comfort, who ran a small 24-hour diner near the bus terminal on the other side of town. Miss Comfort didn't ask many questions. She saw a girl with old eyes in a young face and simply made space for her behind the counter. It was there bussing tables and pouring coffee on late shifts that Adaeze first crossed paths with a man who would change the direction of her entire life. Though on that first night, she had no idea who he truly was. He came in alone, close to midnight, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses despite the hour, clearly trying not to be recognised. He ordered black coffee and eggs and sat at the counter like any tired traveller passing through. Adaeze, 17 by then, didn't recognise him either. She had no time for television or celebrity gossip between school and double shifts. She simply saw a quiet, exhausted-looking man, and she treated him the way she treated everyone, with careful, guarded kindness, the kind of kindness only someone who's been hurt enough truly knows how to give. His name was Kelechi Obi. Within 2 years, half the country would know his face from film premieres and magazine covers, his name trending during every award season. But that night, he was simply a man who noticed something in a diner waitress's eyes that unsettled him. A sadness too deep for someone so young, and a dignity that refused to bow beneath it. He came back the following week, and the week after that. Conversations grew longer over refills of coffee he didn't really need. Adaeze told him nothing of her past at first. Trust didn't come easily to a girl the world had discarded. But slowly, over late-night shifts and quiet corner booth conversations, walls that had stood for 2 years began, carefully, to lower. If you're starting to feel something for Adaeze right now, if her story is stirring something in your chest, let it. Take a breath. Comment below and tell us honestly if this story is touching you the way it's touching us. And give this video a like before we continue, because what happens next will break your heart before it heals it. It took Kelechi 8 months to admit who he really was. He'd been terrified, he confessed one night, that revealing his fame would change the way she looked at him. That she'd suddenly see a celebrity instead of the man who sat quietly at her counter. Adaeze's reaction surprised even herself. She wasn't dazzled, she was afraid. Fame meant visibility, and visibility meant the past could find her. If people know your face, she told him, staring at the steam rising off her coffee, eventually they learn mine too. And there are people in my past I never want to see me again. Kelechi didn't press her. He simply took her hand. The first time he ever had, and said words she'd carry for the rest of her life. Then let them see you. Let them see exactly who you became. Their relationship moved slowly, deliberately, kept out of the tabloids with the same care a man hides a wound. Kelechi's mother, upon meeting Adaeze, wept, not from disapproval, but because she recognized in the girl's quiet strength the same fire that had carried her own mother through hardship decades before. Where Adaeze had been discarded, Kelechi's family embraced her. Where she'd been silenced, she was finally heard. It took nearly 3 years from that first cup of coffee to the wedding, a small private ceremony upstate, announced to the public only after the fact. A single photo released showing Kelechi Obi married to a woman the entertainment press knew nothing about. The story of Hollywood's most private wedding trended for a week. No one, in all that noise, connected the quiet bride in the photo to a girl who had once been thrown out into the rain by her stepmother across the country. Here is where the story deepens and where we ask you to stay a little closer, because it's about to get complicated in ways you won't see coming. If this journey with Adaeze has moved you even slightly, drop a comment with your thoughts. And like this video, it truly helps more people find stories like this one. Stories that remind us pain is never the end of the sentence. Now, 7 years after that rainy night, life in Ngozi's household had not gone the way she once imagined. Her own children, Chiamaka and Uzo, had grown into adults burdened by the same entitlement Ngozi had cultivated in them, but without the sharpness or luck to sustain it. Chiamaka's marriage collapsed within 2 years amid rumours of infidelity. Hers, not her husband's. Uzo drifted between jobs, running up debts he quietly covered by selling off pieces of the family shop his father Emeka had spent a lifetime building. The building Ngozi had claimed so triumphantly that stormy night had, piece by piece, begun to fall apart from the inside. Unpaid rent on the storefront, a leaking roof no one repaired, whispered debts to suppliers who no longer extended credit to the family name. Ngozi, now in her late 50s, had grown bitter in the particular way people grow bitter when the life they schemed for refuses to arrive. She still spoke of Adaeze occasionally, not with guilt, but with a kind of dismissive contempt, as though the girl she'd thrown out barely deserved memory. Wherever she ended up, she'd say to the neighbours, she's probably struggling. Ungrateful kids always end up struggling. She had no idea how wrong she was. She had no idea, in fact, that the woman gracing entertainment magazine covers as Adaeze Obi, wife of award-winning actor and philanthropist Kelechi Obi, was the very girl she'd cast into a rainstorm with nothing but a duffel bag and a broken heart. The collision was coming, though. Life has a way of circling back exactly when we least expect it, and it was about to circle back for Ngozi in a way she could never have prepared for. Kelechi's foundation, a charitable organisation he and Adaeze had built quietly over the years to support young people aging out of unstable homes, first-generation strivers and struggling families, had recently expanded into underserved neighbourhoods across the country. It was Adaeze's idea, born from a wound she never fully explained to her husband, though he understood enough not to ask too many questions. I want to reach the kids nobody's watching out for, she told him once. The ones sent away in the rain. He simply nodded and let her lead. The Foundation's newest initiative involved a televised community event, cameras, local officials, a full production crew, visiting overlooked neighbourhoods to open renovated community centres and distribute scholarship funds. Adaeze, though she preferred to stay out of the spotlight, had agreed, after much persuasion from her husband and his team, to make rare public appearance. The location chosen, entirely by coincidence, entirely by the cruel design of fate that stories like this are built upon, was the very neighbourhood where Ngozi still lived. Word spread through the block days before the event. Everyone was talking about it. Kelechi Obi himself was coming, along with his notoriously private wife, to open a renovated community centre and hand out scholarship cheques to local families. Ngozi, ever eager to be seen among the important, made sure she and her children secured seats in the front section reserved for community elders, positioning herself, as she always did, exactly where the cameras would land. Here is where we pause, because what happens in the next few moments will change everything you thought you understood about this story. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just a story about cruelty. It's about to become a story about reckoning. Like this video now if you can feel that shift coming, and stay with us, because Ngozi is about to come face to face with a ghost she buried 7 years ago. The day arrived bright and unusually clear for the season, as if the sky itself had chosen to withhold the rain this time. A crowd gathered in the plaza outside the newly renovated community centre, folding chairs arranged in rows, a small stage set up with a podium and a ribbon stretched across the entrance. Ngozi sat near the front, dressed in her finest coat, whispering proudly to Chiamaka about how she used to know important people too, back when the family still had standing on this block. She had rehearsed in her mind exactly how she would greet the celebrity couple, warm, gracious, the picture of a respected community elder. Then the motorcade arrived. Security first, then aides, then Kelechi Obi himself, waving to the crowd with the easy warmth of a man used to being loved by strangers. The crowd erupted. Ngozi clapped along, swept up in the excitement, and then the passenger door of the second SUV opened, and a woman stepped out, tall, composed, dressed simply but with unmistakable presence, her face calm in the way that only comes from surviving storms no one in that crowd could imagine. Ngozi's clapping slowed, something in her chest tightened before her mind even understood why. The woman turned slightly, scanning the crowd the way public figures do, polite, unfocused, and for one fraction of a second, her eyes landed directly on Ngozi's face. Time did something strange in that moment. Ngozi's mouth went dry. The gold earrings she'd worn for the occasion suddenly felt heavy, absurd, like costume jewellery on the wrong stage. Because the eyes looking back at her, calm and unreadable, belonged unmistakably to a girl she had once called difficult. A girl she had once put out into the rain and told to never come back. A girl whose father's shop she had claimed as her own before selling off pieces of it, one by one. "It can't be," Ngozi whispered, gripping Chiamaka's arm so tightly her daughter flinched. "That is not possible." But it was. Adaeze Nwosu, now Adaeze Obi, stood not 30 feet away, wife of one of the most celebrated actors in the country, guest of honour at an event built to help exactly the kind of overlooked kid she herself had once been. If your heart is racing right now the way ours is just writing this, comment below with what you think Ngozi is feeling in this exact moment. Shame? Fear? Denial? And like this video, because the confrontation you've been waiting for is about to happen, and it will not go the way you expect. Adaeze had known, of course, exactly whose neighbourhood this was. She had chosen it herself, deliberately, quietly, without telling even her husband the full truth of why. This was not vengeance dressed as coincidence. This was a reckoning she had spent 7 years preparing herself to survive without breaking. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways, rehearsing anger, rehearsing coldness, rehearsing the perfect cutting words she might finally say. But standing there, watching Ngozi's face crumble in real time beneath the weight of recognition, Adaeze felt something far quieter than the rage she'd expected. She felt, strangely, like a storm finally reaching the shore it had been travelling toward for years. Inevitable, but not violent. The ceremony proceeded agonizingly for nearly an hour, with Ngozi sitting stiff and pale near the front, unable to look away, unable to look directly at the stage either. Chiamaka kept whispering questions her mother refused to answer. Uzo simply stared at his shoes, doing the arithmetic of shame in his head. When the speeches ended and the ribbon was cut on the newly renovated centre, the crowd surged forward for photographs and handshakes. It was inevitable that the two women's paths would cross. Adaeze made certain of it. She approached the family personally, flanked by an aide, her husband a respectful few steps behind, watching with quiet, careful attention, sensing from his wife's controlled posture that something significant was unfolding, though he still didn't know the full truth. "Good afternoon," Adaeze said, her voice even, warm enough for the cameras nearby, but carrying an unmistakable weight underneath. "I understand you've lived on this block a long time." Ngozi opened her mouth. No sound came out. Her hands trembled around the strap of her purse. Ngozi finally managed, her voice a fraction of its usual sharpness. "I know you. Do you?" Adaeze tilted her head slightly, giving nothing away. "Tell me, from where?" It was perhaps the cruelest kindness Adaeze could have offered, forcing Ngozi to say it herself in front of witnesses, in front of phones angled just close enough to catch the moment without yet understanding its meaning. Ngozi's eyes filled, not with the tears of guilt exactly, but with the tears of a woman watching her carefully built world crack open in public. "Adaeze," she whispered, "my husband's daughter, Emeka's daughter." Gasps rippled through the nearest onlookers who recognized the old family name. Chiamaka's hand flew to her mouth. Someone in the crowd, remembering the tailor shop that used to be on the corner, began quietly explaining to their neighbour exactly who this woman used to be to the guest of honour. And just like that, the murmur spread through the plaza like fire through dry grass. This is the moment we promised you. If this story is affecting you, if you feel the weight of everything Adaeze survived finally colliding with the woman who tried to erase her, like this video right now, and tell us in the comments what you would have said in Adaeze's position, standing there after everything. "Yes," Adaeze said simply. "Emeka's daughter. The one you sent out into the rain 7 years ago, at 16 with nothing but a bag and a threat." "Adaeze, please," Ngozi began, her composure fully gone now, voice cracking. "Not here, not like this. Where would you prefer?" Adaeze's tone didn't rise, didn't sharpen into cruelty, which somehow made it more devastating. "You didn't offer me privacy that night. You didn't offer me a place to prepare or grieve my father properly before you took his home. I'm simply asking where you would have preferred to have this conversation instead." The crowd had gone nearly silent now, the ceremony forgotten, every phone in the vicinity quietly recording what was unfolding. Kelechi stepped closer, not to intervene, but simply to stand beside his wife, a silent, solid presence that said, without words, that whatever happened next, she would not face it alone. Ngozi, cornered by her own history in front of the very community she had spent years impressing with quiet stories of Adaeze's supposed troubles, finally broke. "I was scared," she said, quieter now, almost to herself. "After your father died, I was scared of losing everything to a stepdaughter who wasn't even mine by blood. I convinced myself that if I moved fast enough, the apartment, the shop, whatever was left, it would stay ours. I told myself you'd land on your feet. I told myself it was survival, not cruelty. It was here, right here, that the story's deepest twist revealed itself, one that recontextualized everything the audience thought they understood." Because as Ngozi continued speaking, stumbling through her confession, she admitted something that even Adaeze had never known, that her father Emeka had in fact left behind a will, one filed quietly with a lawyer downtown, explicitly protecting Adaeze's inheritance and her rightful share of the shop. One Ngozi had discovered in his desk drawer, panicked over, and quietly destroyed before anyone else in the family could see it. The apartment, the shop, none of it had ever legally belonged to Ngozi at all. Every year she'd lived off it, sold pieces of it, spent money from it, had been built on a theft she buried the same week she buried her husband. Look back now and you'll realise the signs were always there. The earrings appearing suspiciously fast after a maker's death, how the rushed decision to throw Adaeze out within 3 weeks of the funeral before grief could even properly settle. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. And now, in front of a crowd, cameras, and the daughter she wronged, that calculation had finally caught up to her. Adaeze absorbed this revelation with a stillness that surprised even herself. 7 years of imagined confrontations, and the truth that finally surfaced was worse, and somehow also more clarifying, than anything she'd rehearsed. This wasn't simply a woman who had been cruel out of dislike. This was a woman who had committed an act of theft against a grieving child and built an entire second life on top of that lie. If this twist just hit you the way it hit us, comment "I felt that" below and like the video, because we're heading now into the final stretch of this story, the part where truth finally settles and everyone must live with what has been revealed. There was a long, suspended silence in that plaza. Then Adaeze spoke again, her voice steady, carrying clearly across the hushed crowd. "I'm not here for revenge," she said. "I built a life you can't touch and a name you can't tarnish. I didn't come to this block to humiliate you, though I understand that's exactly what's happened because you built your peace on something that was never yours to take." She turned briefly to her husband, some silent understanding passing between them before continuing. "What I will do is this. The foundation will still fund everything you see behind me today because the kids in this neighborhood did nothing wrong and shouldn't suffer for adult choices made 7 years ago. But the shop, my father's shop, will be legally investigated, and whatever remains of it, whatever wasn't already sold off, will be returned to its rightful record. Not to punish you further than the truth already has, but because some things belong to memory, and memory deserves to be honoured, not stolen." Ngozi wept openly now, no longer performing composure for the crowd, simply broken by the weight of 7 years finally arriving all at once. Chiamaka reached for her mother's shoulder, uncertain, ashamed, caught in the wreckage of choices she'd been too young and too comfortable to question at the time. Uzo said nothing at all, staring at the pavement as though the ground itself might offer an explanation for how far they'd fallen from the life their father had built. In the weeks that followed, the clips from that ceremony spread far beyond the neighbourhood, far beyond the city, carried across timelines by strangers who had never met either woman, but who recognised instantly the ancient shape of the story, the cruelty, the exile, the quiet rise, the unavoidable reckoning. It was the kind of story people needed to believe still happened in the world, that the girl thrown out into the rain doesn't simply vanish, doesn't simply suffer quietly and disappear from history, but sometimes, if she survives long enough, returns wearing a truth no one can deny. Adaeze didn't seek further public confrontation. She let the legal process around her father's shop move quietly, privately, away from cameras, because that part of the story, she said, belonged to her father's memory, not to public spectacle. Ngozi, in the months that followed, lost the last of the property she'd never legally owned, moved into a smaller apartment across town with Chiamaka, and by all accounts from people who still lived on that block, grew quieter, humbler, a woman finally living inside the consequences of a choice made on a rainy night she could never undo. And Adaeze went home. Not to the apartment of her childhood, which held only grief now, but to the life she and Kelechi had built together, a life neither hardship nor cruelty had managed to steal from her in the end. That evening, sitting on the balcony of their high-rise as actual rain finally began to fall over the skyline, Kelechi asked her gently whether she felt any peace after everything. Adaeze thought about it for a long moment, listening to the rain the way she once had as a frightened 16-year-old walking into a wet city street with nothing but a bag and a promise. I think, she said finally, peace was never something she could give me or take from me. I think I carried it out that door with me the night she thought she was destroying me. I just didn't know it yet. If this story taught you anything tonight, let it be this: the people who cast you out in your lowest moment do not get to write the ending of your story. Only you get to write that. Before you go, subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next story like this one. Share it with someone who needs to hear tonight that their pain is not the end of their story. And tell us in the comments, what's the biggest lesson you're taking with you from Adaeze's journey? We read every single comment and we'll be right here waiting to tell you the next story, because there's always another storm and there's always someone walking through it who deserves in the end to come out the other side.